The beauty, the mystery, and the history of the Earth. What secrets lie beneath its surface? What clues has it left about its past, about our past, about where we come from and how we got here, and when? Fossils are the only hard evidence that can help us understand what life existed in the distant past. Could the stories we've been told about the distant past be a miscalculation? More importantly, why does it matter? What do the remnants of the past tell us about the direction we are headed? Hi, I'm Marcus Lloyd, and welcome to Unlocking the Mysteries of Genesis. As science and technology advance, we're discovering that the ancient text of the Bible contains more truth in it than we've ever imagined. In this series, we examine the evidence from geology, astronomy, biology, and other fields of science to see if the data supports what the Bible says about our origins. But where besides the Bible do we find answers for the really big questions? Ones like, who am I? What am I? How did I get here? Can science really provide answers to the deepest questions of life? Well, there is a way of digging up the evidence and finding the truth. Today, we've come to Dinosaur National Monument to explore rocks and fossils, to learn what secrets they reveal and what science really means. Many dinosaur fossils, like this bone of a sauropod, can be found here, but there are lots more. In fact, dinosaur fossils are so abundant here that this exhibit hall was built around a huge rock wall containing approximately 1,500 dinosaur bones. Let's check it out. Here's one way of looking at the science of fossils. Pictures have a way of telling the story of our lives, whether it's a family album or a pic you send your friends. Fossils are kind of an Instagram, a moment in time captured and posted on the page of Earth's history. But what are fossils? And what do they really tell us? Fossils are kind of a freeze frame in time, a snapshot of the past that gives us a glimpse of life, prolific life that once populated the Earth. But does it explain the origins of that life? Well, can a snapshot of your life explain who you really are, how you got there, and what you did? What does a fossil snapshot actually reveal? And how can what's missing reveal everything? One of the main tools evolutionary scientists have used to promote evolution has been the fossil record. All the fossils which lie buried in rock formations in the sedimentary layers or strata of the Earth. As you go deeper into the Earth, the normal assumption is that you go deeper in time. There are 23 layers of strata here in Dinosaur National Monument, many of which expose fossils that provide a glimpse into this hidden past. When you look at which fossils are buried in which layer, you supposedly get a picture of how life evolved. From the simplest organisms buried in the deepest layers to more complex and recent organisms like dinosaurs. Most evolutionists believe that this process is a very slow and gradual one. Since change would have happened very gradually, there should theoretically be transitional forms in the fossil record that show a major body change between primitive versions of an organism and more complex versions, such as the creature that's somewhere between a fish with fins and an amphibian with legs. Let's investigate one of the more famous examples.
Darwin was pretty frustrated at the first publication of The Origin of Species, and he was hopeful that there would be evidence to support his theory. They hadn't really dug deeply into the fossil record by that point, and so they were all looking for hard evidence that would support his contentions. And so Archaeopteryx was hailed as a wonderful find, a feathered dinosaur, a very important transitional form between dinosaurs and birds. So there are things we know about Archaeopteryx that cause us to question it as a true transitional species. Dinosaurs were all over the planet. We find their remains all around the world. If Archaeopteryx was the progenitor to modern birds, why is it only found in Germany? Why isn't it found in deposits all over the world? The other important thing is that true modern birds have been found in strata older than the strata that Archaeopteryx came out of. So if it is the true progenitor to birds, why are there modern birds buried deeper in the fossil layer than Archaeopteryx?
But what exactly is it? Evolutionary scientists still can't agree. Is it a reptile with feathers or a bird with teeth? Can it only be interpreted as a missing link? What does this fossil, or any fossil, actually reveal? It all depends on how you look at it. We all tend to have our favorite scenes from films. It could be an action scene, maybe a funny scene, or even a romantic scene. For some, they just love the last scene of a happy ending. But you can't keep watching the same scene from a movie and expect to know the whole story. So what story is the fossil record telling? Even now, there are some secular scientists who admit that the evolutionist narrative is more than proving a theory of origins. It's a belief system. Dr. Michael Ruse, a world-renowned philosopher of science and staunch atheist, admits that evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. He goes on to describe himself as an ardent evolutionist and an ex-Christian. And he says and admits that in this one complaint, the literalists are absolutely right. Evolution is a religion. So does the fossil record provide an evolutionary picture of the past? Some secular scientists, perhaps unwittingly, have begun to challenge the theory of evolution.
Well, evolutionists have traditionally thought that evolution went gradually, and that gradually a fish changed into an amphibian and changed into a mammal and on up. But where are these transitional forms? Well, Stephen Jay Gould at Harvard was a thoroughgoing evolutionist and an expert in the fossil record. He noted that the fossil record really doesn't document Darwinian change. He said what we find is one type of animal here, and then we find another type of animal here. Now, we know that they evolved, but there's no evidence that they evolved. He proposed a new theory called punctuated equilibrium, that the basic equilibrium that we see today in life forms, stasis, things staying the way they are. He says, no, that equilibrium was interrupted by punctuations with maybe a change in the environment or something, and that it happened rapidly. It happened so rapidly that it went from fish to amphibian and left no fossils. The fact is, we find no fossils.
The views of Gould, Eldridge, and Stanley stirred up quite a bit of debate among evolutionists. It just goes to show that even evolutionary scientists don't always agree on what the fossils are telling us. Perhaps what they believe affects what they see. So we've come back to this. Here we can see what digging up the past can show us, but what's equally important is what it doesn't show. And how can something that is not there sometimes be more important than what is? Let's put the evidence on trial and see. When lawyers enter a courtroom, they're required to do one thing: fully present their case before a jury. When a jury is sequestered for deliberations, they're required to come to a decision based not on their emotions about the case, but on one question: what does the evidence show? So let's step aside from emotional arguments about science and religion and just take a look at what the facts show and what seems the most logical. Let me present Exhibit A, diversity. The evidence indicates a tremendous diversity of life. Thousands upon thousands of examples of fossils, all preserved with few, if any, sign of decay. How could this happen? Dead animals don't usually turn into fossils. So what forces could have created such near perfect preservation? Well, a very rapid burial of these creatures. So rapid that they don't even have time to decay or end up as a scavenger's dinner. When we look at the evidence, what else do we discover? Exhibit B, stability, or stasis, as scientists call it. There is fully formed prolific life captured in the fossil record. Life that shows complexity and completeness. And it's a record from which, strangely enough, the transitional forms of life are missing. Amid all that diversity and complexity, there is no undisputed evidence that shows one species transitioning into another. It seems that what the fossil record doesn't reveal could be just as important as what it does. Let's suppose we want to prove there's been a murder, and we come before a judge looking for a guilty verdict. Well, before you can even come to trial, you have to have actual evidence that there's been a murder. But what if you had no body, no murder weapon, and no witnesses? The jury is duty-bound to go with the preponderance of the evidence. If there's no body, no weapon, and no witnesses, the jury would most likely conclude no murder. The case would be dismissed. You see, the evidence we don't find in the fossil record, like decay from exposure and transitional forms, is every bit as important as what we do find. Just like the jury in our dismissed murder case, scientists are also called in to follow the evidence. Without data, all you have is a theory.
In every textbook on this, they always produce not only the evolutionary tree of simple going to complex and all, but they also produce a geologic column. The fossils as they're presented go simple to complex. Simple, one-celled animals down at the bottom, and then mammals, man, up at the top. This simple evolutionary picture of simple to complex, it really isn't the story of the fossil record. What you see is complexity at every stage. You do not see this simple to complex change. That's the story of evolution, but it's not the story of the fossils. The fossils show complexity and design and sudden appearance all along the way. The lowest strata, the Precambrian layer, consists of several geologic eons and contains very few fossils. And then there's a period of time at the beginning of the Paleozoic era where ancient life seems to have simply exploded. The fossil record suddenly goes from showing fossils of relative simplicity to an overabundance of fossils showing great diversity and increasing complexity. This is commonly referred to as the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian layer gives evidence of a sudden proliferation of life forms that were not present in the previous layer. So, from the Precambrian to the Cambrian layers, you go from very few fossils to a great abundance of fossils, yet no transitional fossils in between.
Where are the simpler transitional forms that should be mixed in this rock-hard record? If they exist, they should be found in rock layers that are lower, therefore older. They're just not there. And if you look carefully at the geologic strata in the Grand Canyon, for instance, there are, according to an evolutionary worldview, huge gaps in time between some of the layers. Meaning whole layers of geologic time have gone missing. Either the layers were never deposited or were eroded away. These gaps are called unconformities, and even secular scientists have a hard time explaining where these missing layers went. They admit that the fossil record is incomplete in the Grand Canyon.
If Grand Canyon is this stack of pancakes, well, this pancake is dated by their methods, and they're thought to be, this is the youngest, this is the oldest. But in reality, this one might be 350 million years old, and this is 310 million years ago. There's 40 million years in between these two layers. There's no evidence of streams going through here and eroding a stream gulch, or there's no evidence of trees and their roots penetrating, or there's no worms burrowing, or there's nothing happening for 40 million years.
So presumably, that's where all the transitional forms have gone, missing in those gaps of time. Or, as suggested by Gould and Eldridge, these evolutionary leaps could have happened so rapidly, at least in evolutionary time, that there wasn't a chance for any transitional fossils to get, well, fossilized. Either way, it sounds to me like no record, no evidence, not much proof of transitional forms. On top of that, there are some surprising new discoveries that have tilted the evidence in favor of a creationist interpretation.
The general public is under the impression that dinosaurs lived 65, 68 million years ago. That's what you find in the textbooks. That's what you find in the popular magazines. However, science has really outstripped that knowledge in the last 10 years or so. Why? Because we found soft tissue in many different specimens from different fossil sites all over the world. Back in the mid-90s, Mary Schweitzer from North Carolina State University began working with specimens at the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. And so what they found was a large T-Rex. And they excavated out the T-Rex, and they excavated out the femur, which is the long leg bone. And she soaked it in a weak acid called EDTA. And what that acid does is it dissolves away the bone mineral, and it leaves whatever's inside that bone undissolved. And in this case, she found soft tissues. And the tech who did the dissolution for her pointed out, I'm finding soft tissue. I'm finding something that's not characteristic of very old bones. And in this case, they think they're 68 million years old. So she had the tech repeat the experiment over and over and over again. And each time it produced this soft tissue. And what she found was actual blood vessels inside this femur that was fully mineralized and encapsulated, which would have protected those soft tissues over deep time. And she found what looked like red blood cells. So using this immunohistochemistry, very sophisticated experiments, she proved the existence of these original biomolecules and biomaterials that go back to the original dinosaur. About 5 years ago, the Creation Research Society decided to mount a new project called iDino, the investigation of dinosaur intact natural osteotissue or bone tissue. And so we designed this project to go out and find dinosaur bones in the digs, in known fossil digs, to bring them back to the lab, to decalcify them, to put them in that weak acid, dissolve away the mineral, and see if we could find soft tissue inside the bones. On our last day, with only a few hours left, we found the largest Triceratops horn that was ever found on this ranch in the Hell Creek Formation. About 45 inches long, about 9 inches in diameter, and it was buried 3 feet below the surface. We did the decalcification experiment, and what we found is really different from what Mary Schweitzer found. She found individual cells floating in the solution after she decalcified the bone in this weak acid. We found entire sheets of soft tissue. But we thin sectioned this, and we found entire stacks of osteocytes inside this thick sheet of fibrillar bone material. So the question is, how do these very delicate, very specialized molecules and proteins survive 68 million years?
Wait a minute. Soft, flexible tissue from dinosaur bone? Now, how's that possible? According to the theory of evolution, dinosaurs walked the Earth over 100 million years ago. Could soft tissue inside a bone really exist for that long? So instead of making assumptions based on what's not in the fossil record, let's break it down and see what is there. 95% of those fossils are marine invertebrates. That's a huge portion of the fossil record. Of the 5% remaining fossils, the vast majority are plants, trees, and algae. Less than 1% of that 5% are vertebrates, creatures with a skeleton on the inside. First are fish, then the rest birds, dinosaurs, and last of all, mammals and humans. Which poses another question. Marine invertebrates in the middle of Colorado? Seriously? You know, these fossils are scattered throughout the world, and they are amazingly well preserved. What's the explanation?
This lowest level, this Salk megasequence is called, or the Cambrian layers. Sometimes these things go for miles and miles, go across the continent, go into the other continent, go around the world. It's understood nowadays as something happened which caused a inundation of the continent or whatever the land surface was, eroded off that great unconformity, and then began to lay down the sediments on top of that. Those sediments have hardened into sedimentary rock and the dead things have hardened into fossils. So the rock and fossil record is really an evidence of this water-based deposition of sediments that have become rock.
Now we're getting a clearer picture of the story the fossil record tells us. There's evidence of a massive mud flow, the instantaneous burial of fossils, and finally, rapid wholesale devastation and death on a global scale. Where have we seen this before? Ah, yes. Beautiful. Everything has this rosy glow. You know, appearances can be deceiving. Now, I could keep on wearing these glasses and claim that the whole world is rose-colored, but it wouldn't change the facts. The world just doesn't look that way. Sometimes the way people see the evidence depends on the glasses they choose to wear. I'd rather see the world the way it is. There's a story that matches the evidence we see here, and it comes from Genesis chapter 7. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. It looks to me like the evidence and the Bible are telling the same story. But even with the evidence on your side, you'll discover that this is a very unpopular viewpoint, one subjected to ridicule and abuse. But popularity has never had anything to do with the truth. Galileo and Dr. Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis were two scientists who were ridiculed, even imprisoned, because the facts they discovered went against popular thought. For Galileo, it was for claiming that the sun was at the center of our solar system. For Dr. Semmelweis, it was for trying to introduce hygiene into hospitals during the 1800s. Both of them were ridiculed, but they were right, and popular science was wrong. Well, we've delved into the mystery buried beneath our feet and discovered the evidence of the fossil record. But the more we uncover, the more there is to know. For example, what about this great cataclysmic event, the one that created the record? Well, that's a journey for our next show. So join me for our next episode as we walk down the road of scientific discovery. Or maybe we should just take a boat.